bar brawls, heart-stopping explosions, and the gritty intensity of MMA. The new Roadhouse revives the 1989 classic with a bang. However, you may have missed some of these crucial Easter eggs and references that are scattered throughout the film. Let's take a look at what you missed in Roadhouse. Warning, there are obviously spoilers, so if you haven't seen Roadhouse yet, go check it out on Prime Video. You can also watch the original currently there too. First things first, the new movie uses nearly the same logo that they used for the 1989 original film. They also keep the hero's name the same, as Jake Gyllenhaal plays Dalton, though this time his first name is Elwood instead of James, more than likely a reference to one of the Blues Brothers who bears the same first name, as Roadhouse is known for its bluesy music. The film's villain Brant has a similar name to the original's villain, Brad. During the opening of the movie, Post Malone makes an appearance as underground fighter Carter Ford, credited as his real name Austin Post, as his new single Horsepower plays in the background. Similar to the original film, the Roadhouse owner's Frankie scouts out someone for her bar, similar to Frank Tillman scouting for Dalton at the bandstand, as both owners share similar names. Elwood is attacked with a knife similar to the opening of the original film, and fixes up his wound in a similar manner while being offered a job. The key difference here is that the wound is in his side instead of near his shoulder, as in 1989, Dalton had a similar wound after his first real fight at the Double Deuce. Frankie brings up that Ernest Hemingway used to drink at the Roadhouse she owns, which would line up with his time spent in Key West in the 1930s. Frankie offers to pay Elwood $5,000 a week, a nod to where the original Dalton asked for $5,000 up front and $500 a night. 2024 Dalton uses a junker car like his predecessor, though loses it very early on. One thing to notice where this film takes place: the original took place in Jasper, Missouri, while this one takes place in Florida. When Dalton first arrives, there's a restaurant next to the bookstore called the Double Deuce, a fitting homage to the original Roadhouse. When he arrives at the Roadhouse, he asks for a black coffee, the same drink the original Dalton would typically ask for at work. Billy, one of the servers and an eventual bouncer, recognizes Dalton instantly, similar to Carrie Ann's character in the original, and sports a black eye similar to Steve, another Double Deuce employee in the original film. Just like in the 1989 film, for their protection, the bands that play throughout the film play behind a chicken wire fence. Unlike the original, where Dalton observes the first night and hangs back, Elwood interferes on his first night immediately. Mo, played by Arturo Castro, serves as this film's tinker, who is the comedic relief in the original film. Both Daltons share the same technique where they would typically attack their opponent's knee, as seen in the first bar brawl. While driving, we hear the famous song Kokomo by the Beach Boys, a fitting song given the setting of the film. As Dalton walks out, Ellie, this film's counterpart to the original's Dr. Elizabeth Clay, also known as Doc, thanks him for all the new patients, and a callback to Doc mentioning that Double Deuce sends her a lot of business. Ellie also tends to the knife wound Elwood suffered earlier in the movie, in parallel to Doc stitching up Dalton. There are also some nice callbacks in the scene, including the quote, "Nobody ever wins in a fight," Elwood calling Ellie Doc, flinching from being stitched up, and denying any pain medicine, though Ellie later clarifies that it's an antibiotic. In Dalton's UFC flashbacks, there are some memorable UFC cameos, including referees Chris Tione and Mark Smith, announcer Bruce Buffer, play-by-play commentator John Anik, UFC Ultimate Insider host Megan O'Leary, and Hall of Famer Daniel Cormier. Jay Huron also plays Dalton's opponent, Jax Jetway Harris. In the flashback, we can briefly hear Rina Sawayama's cover of Enter Sandman by Metallica, a song that was also used by former UFC champion Brock Lesnar. Elwood gets woken up and is brought breakfast by Laura, in parallel to where Carrie Ann brought the original Dalton breakfast. While talking with Brant, Mo describes Elwood as Mr. Rogers, a beloved children's television host. Brant goes on to knock out the captain, similar to Brad Wesley knocking out O'Connor in the original film. Elwood calls out that there's a patron with a knife under his shirt, similar to the original Dalton calling out Ketchum showing up with a knife on his boot. Similarly, this Dalton mentors his bouncers like his predecessor. We also get a nice nod where there's a mini montage of this Dalton working out, similarly to the 89 Dalton. Billy and Reef instruct a couple of girls to get off the tables, parallel to Hank attempting to do the same in the original. Elwood nearly gets run over in a callback to Brad Wesley, almost crashing into Dalton. Elwood disarms Dell, similar to Ketchum being disarmed by Dalton near the end of the movie. This Dalton also inadvertently ends Dell's life, compared to the original Dalton fighting Jimmy to the death. Similarly to how Tinker and O'Connor asked Dalton to come with them to visit Brad Wesley, Elwood is approached, though he disarms, or disfingers, Jack. Of course, the moment we've all been waiting for is the appearance of Conor McGregor as Knox, who needs no introduction and plays this film's Jimmy. Both characters are also womanizers as seen in their respective films, and Knox sets the stand on fire, similar to how Jimmy sets Emmett's house on fire in the original. Knox drives with the top down just like his predecessor Jimmy on the way to Brant's residence. Brant is just as powerful as Wesley and has the police force in his back pocket as they successfully take this Dalton on a ride similar to how Dalton is escorted and talks to Brad Wesley. It's revealed that the sheriff is Doc's father in an interesting parallel to how Doc was the niece of Red Webster. Brant makes his appearance at the bar in a similar manner to Wesley and reveals, like his predecessor, that his family is responsible for bringing businesses to Glass Key. We also see that this Dalton also was responsible for his opponent's death in his MMA fight, whereas the original Dalton also killed someone in self-defense. Brant instructs Knox to attack just like Wesley does, and we see another parallel where Knox attacks with the golf club, much like Jimmy attacking with the pool cue. Knox even goes so far as to overpower his opponents in numbers and slam someone's head like the '89 Dalton did in a bar brawl, with all these actions causing an all-out brawl. Though Dalton ends up with some injuries, the fight comes out to what could be considered a draw, similar to how Jimmy and Dalton's fight was stopped by Brad. Just like the original film, a favorite gag of mine is how the band keeps playing during the fights. The bookstore is set on fire, similar to Red's store in Emmett's house, and is the reason for Dalton snapping and going after Brant, as Wade's death was the reason that Dalton went after Wesley. Elwood walks in on a party at Brant's house and faces off with Vince, this film's Ketchum, who also has a knife. And my favorite reference thus far, Vince's hyoid bone is broken, echoing Dalton ripping out Jimmy's throat. Dex says, "I'm a cop, you idiot," making a nod to the famous line uttered by Arnold in Kindergarten Cop. Brant's plan to hurt Ellie mimics Wesley's plan to hurt both Wade and Doc. Brant attempts to shoot Dalton just like his predecessor Wesley, but ultimately fails. During the final fight, Connor's down to his shorts in a UFC-like manner. Of course, we see many MMA moves, with my favorite being shown here being the fireman's carry, or the FU, for you WWE fans. We once again hear the Enter Sandman cover during the final parts of the fight, which is a nice touch. Ellie shows up after the final fight, similar to how Doc shows up in time to see Dalton show mercy to Wesley. The sheriff does a nice nod with the "You were never here" as a callback to Frank, Emmett, Red, and Stroudenmire claiming that they didn't see anything to the police as they showed up. Unlike the original, this time Dalton leaves town for good and does not stay behind. Last but not least, we see that Knox survived the fight with Dalton and leaves the hospital, presumably either looking for his next job or for Dalton. Overall, I thought this movie wasn't bad. I'd give it an honest 6 out of 10. I wasn't expecting it to be a carbon copy of the original, which is a classic if you haven't seen it, and I was more curious about this film than anything. It was interesting seeing Connor's debut. At times his lines were funny, but I felt some others were a bit too cheesy, but overall he does a decent job at playing an unhinged villain. I'm not entirely sure if there will be a sequel given the current reception of the film, but I think it would be worth seeing what happens to Knox and if he and Elwood would cross paths again. If you have Amazon Prime, it's worth watching this movie at least once, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it. This movie still had some nice callbacks to the original, which I appreciate, though I don't think anyone can handle a reboot better currently than Creed and Cobra Kai. Let me know what your favorite moment was down below, and if you enjoyed this video, check out the Easter egg breakdown I did for Creed 3. Stay beautiful, stay awesome, and we'll catch you around next time.